I'm really excited about episode 2 of the Q Suite. This week we have Levine, who we're calling a global data power woman, and it's an appropriate title. You'll see that on the website and on some of the stuff that's what we're kind of referencing for her, and it's the truth. She is someone who used to work in the office of Vice President Gore, and also was the Deputy Chief Data Officer for the United States government most recently. She has recently had a career pivot, and one of the things that we wanted to talk to her about, obviously, is data and AI and sort of all of the various things that are happening in the business world, but also wanted to talk about how she's organized her career in a way that's allowed her to take this pivot.
And what I love talking about Anne was just, it doesn't matter who you are, you will experience a career pivot at some point in your career. And it's good to hear from someone who's done it so well as Anne has.
Absolutely. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm very glad to present Anne Levine in the Q Suite. Anne, thank you so much for joining the Q Suite.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I've been excited about this for really since we did our prep call a couple of weeks ago, and just so excited to get your perspective on a wide variety of things. But before we start with that, why don't you give our listeners and viewers just a little bit of an overview of your career to date?
Sure. Well, I started out as a policy analyst at the Federal Communications Commission. I did that job for about 10 years, and then I went into our Office of Strategic Planning, where we were expected to do out-of-the-box thinking. And I worked on a 60-day data review and fell in love with data management. After that, I decided I wasn't being asked to do any more with data after the 60-day data review, but I really wanted to. And we had hired a chief data officer from the outside, and I decided I wanted to work with him and work with the agency. So out of the 60-day data review, we hired a chief data officer, and I wasn't asked specifically to work on a project, but I decided that it would behoove the agency for me to show him around. And we worked on some great stuff in those first years, and I've been doing data ever since.
It's amazing. So I also know that you spent a little bit of time in the office of the vice president. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I did, yeah. So I graduated undergrad early, 6 months early, and as such, I was able to accept an offer at the office of the Vice President, Al Gore. I worked in the West Wing. It was a pretty amazing job for a 21-year-old. Yeah. I served coffee, and I did all those types of things, but I also summarized briefings and had a lot of responsibility for someone at 21. And it was like working in a museum. It was truly amazing. And I feel like that job shaped my work ethic and made me realize that you can accomplish anything, really. Yeah. You just have to put your mind to it. So.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing how that one job sometimes, I think back about my career, and I think about that one or two jobs that really changed, not necessarily the trajectory of my resume, but rather kind of who I was and how I dealt with business. Right. Maybe it was because of the way the organization was assembled. Maybe it was because of a great boss, but there was something about it that kind of changed me. And I think I hear you say the same.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember, college kids are full of excuses and why they can't do this and why they can't do that. And I got to this job, and when I said I can't do that, they said, no, you have to do that. No is not an acceptable answer in this job. And from that, it just expanded my brain and made me work harder in my head to accomplish what I wanted to get out of the jobs that I took on.
Yeah. You had such an interesting broad career. We're just hearing just a corner of it right now. But you have also had kind of a major career pivot in sort of the recent past. Talk to us a little bit about kind of what your life currently looks like.
Sure. So presently I am in New York working through the company that I founded, Blue Maple Solutions. I had formed it in London, where I had moved to live with my wife and our daughter. My wife was British, and we decided we wanted to live in London. But it didn't work out, and these things happen, and now I'm back back in the States and working out of New York where I grew up.
So, one of the things that I find sort of really fascinating as I reach this point in my career, that might be of interest to some of our younger listeners, is how to kind of assemble your career in a way that allows you to make these kind of lifestyle choices.
Right.
Obviously, not everyone can do that, but when
Right.
you can, it does require more than just a certain kind of salary. It requires a certain kind of confidence in your management and also in your own personal skills. So, can you talk to our listeners a bit about that?
Sure. I think the ability to say that I was going to leave government after 27 years and just, go early retirement and move to London, new country, starting off on a new foot, spending a little time doing some hands-on momming to my daughter. I think that came out of the work that I did as Deputy Chief Data Officer. In the past, I had sort of pushed the envelope with respect to the kinds of things that I wanted to accomplish and that we did accomplish with respect to data management at the FCC. But it was when I grew confidence in myself to not always be so nervous about putting something forward. It was when I realized that my knowledge was greater than I had realized, and that it was really inside of me. It wasn't something that I had to prove to anybody. I think when that happens, when you realize that you have become the person that you wanted to be or that you saw yourself as, and you realize you've arrived, that allows you to take chances, and it allows you to move forward in ways that that aren't as safe as when you're trying to prove yourself. So I think as a result, I think that just about anybody can reach that level. You have to pick your area of specialty, and then you have to keep trying to spend the early years proving yourself. And then when you realize you've made it to that level, then you can take more risk.
I love that. It's amazing. James, I know you had some questions. You're a scientist, and I know you had some questions about data.
Yes. Good,
So,
good. Good transition. Yeah. So, and just a little bit about me is, I started my career as an early discovery chemist in a pharmaceutical company, which we did high throughput screening, which is very much nanochemistry. So it's all about the data and data management. So I'm so excited you're here, and I'm talking to a like-minded person, like what, being analytical and whatnot. I do want to talk more about, those career transitions. Right. And so you've spoken about and written about extensively about how people and culture aspect of data management is far more difficult than the technical execution piece. So
Right.
how did you use that expertise and that understanding that you've built through your career? How did that guide you as you navigated these massive life transitions over the last few years?
So I'm thinking about this in segments, and there was the first segment about data and culture. I think that what I realized was that everybody at the FCC wanted to be a data analyst. They wanted to be the best data analyst. They wanted to work on the best, most high-profile analyses. And I realized that instead of trying to up my skill set, I realized that there was a void in organizing it and making sure that everybody who was using data was using the right data, was using the best data, that the quality of the data that we had was in the best shape that it could be for the analysis. We had worked with several live data streams, and people would do a poll in the morning, and then someone would do a poll in the afternoon, and they'd send an analysis upstairs, and they'd say, why is this so different? Because millions of dollars could have changed in that few hour interim. And so we had to find a way to standardize the use of data, the access and the use of data. So it's not just about, showing your analytical acumen. I had done that. I was satisfied with the analyses I had worked on, and I really wanted to be able to provide a more organizing principle around the way we use data. I think the second part of the question, if you could reiterate, it had to do with my life transition. Can you repeat
Yeah,
that?
how did you use that expertise of taking that, unstructured data, right, and and
Right.
optimizing it and apply that to your, the life changes in your career?
Sure. I think it's the culture of data. And I think that I learned quickly that when I learned something new about the way we were using data, I would write an article or I'd work with someone about writing an article, and it would become thought leadership. And so that thought leadership is what led me to, I think, be selected on the White House Office of Management and Budget Fellowship. And then from there, I found my people. Others who like me, were passionate about data management in a way that most organizations hadn't really adopted yet. And that's why they formed the fellowship, so that we could create a federal data strategy across agencies. I think once I started working with the network of people that thought the way I did, we're all a group of professionals who were passionate, and almost all of our ideas were different, but yet they fit together in ways, synergistic ways. And so I think that allowed me to the next step of starting my own company, or deciding to leave the agency, but still carry on, my thought process on data management.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what was really awesome to hear, Anne, is you found your people.
Yeah.
I think it is so important to find your
Yeah.
people at any job, and I'm glad that you were able to find those people. And those people you take with you in your different life
Yes.
transitions, right?
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
So, you talk about finding your people, and we love to. I love to hear that. I know exactly sort of what you mean. But talk to us a little bit. I think I'm coming more from a tech and financial services background. James is coming from pharma. Talk to me about the environment for an out person in those kind of halls of government. How much do you feel like it's dependent on the administration, and how much do you feel like you can sort of what's the level of openness you feel like you can bring, and authenticity you feel like you can bring of yourself when you were in those spaces?
Are you talking about authenticity about my lifestyle, or are you
Yes.
talking about, okay. Well, I think the best advice I ever received was from my parents, and it came quite early on. And it was that there's a time and a place for everything. For example, when you're a kid, a lot of parents will say, don't swear. But my parents never really said that. They just said, there's a time and a place for it, and now is not the time or the place. Or they would just sort of ignore it, and I'd learned that there was a time and a place. And I think coming of age in an era where being out about your sexuality, your sexual orientation, it hadn't reached the level of, people still were not comfortable
Yeah.
with it, that I learned to pace myself. I learned to, everybody obviously talks about their weekend. I didn't just go full steam ahead and say, oh, well, I went to this gay club, and I waited for the right time to be out and
Yeah.
open and authentic with people. I'm not sure. I think in government, I do think sometimes the administration matters, but mostly it's your coworkers who you've been with over a long time. And you learn who will receive the information well and who will not. And I think it's about just making sure that you're thoughtful about how you reveal information about yourself. And I actually think that that's true if you're in the straight world as well. You don't want to have pictures
You're a
of
data
you.
security picture. You're a data security person. Let's be clear.
yeah,
Yeah, you don't
Not
want,
surprised by that at all.
yeah,
stop using Snapchat, stop using,
yeah,
because you never know what's going to end up out there. And I
Yeah.
think we all know now that, when you go for an interview, they review your social media. That was
I
not
do.
an issue for me when I was
Mhm.
in college, thank God. But I think that it's similar in coming out in the workforce. I think you have to realize that once you put it out there, you can't reel it back in.
Yep. Yep. And I just wanted to say thank you, Anne, for sharing your story. Hearing stories like yours is really what helps my generation, the ones that are coming, after me, about feeling safe and comfortable and confident to come out at work. So I just wanted to make sure that I said thank you for sharing that. And I
Well, thank you
do,
for the,
no, of course,
yeah.
of course. I want to talk a little bit about, we're talking about the journey and all that, and we're talking about the network, bringing it back to our network that's considered career capital, right?
Hmm.
Is the
Hmm.
experience, the skills that you've developed up until this point is considered career capital.
Right.
So you were able to make some really important life decisions with confidence, knowing you've reached a certain point in your career, right? We're talking about that risk earlier.
Right.
For our Q Suite listeners, how do you define the moment an executive has built enough career capital to
Hmm.
make those more risky professional life decisions that meets your personal needs?
That's a good question. I think so. When I first started on the speaking circuit, it was, gosh, I can't remember how many years ago, but I remember being very thankful to the organization that gave me the opportunity. But I was used to sitting behind spreadsheets at my desk with my door closed, nobody, bothering me all day. And here I was being thrust in front of this audience on a stage. And I remember I had, I appeared beside someone who had been on the circuit for a while, and she was very supportive of me, which helped. But I was still nervous, and I had extensive notes, and they were so dense that I couldn't even read them. And then I got flustered and I was nervous. I didn't know how to prepare for something like that. And I remember breaking the ice by saying, if I look uncomfortable up here, it's because I am, because I'm used to being behind a computer, behind a spreadsheet. But I think as I did it more, I realized that the less often that I referred to notes at all, and the more it came from my heart, and the more that it came out somewhat coherent. I think sometimes I'll lose my train of thought, which is, I think, normal. But
Yeah.
when the words that come out of my mouth are authentic to me, and they show that I am not, running back to my office and looking things up in a book to answer a question from a boss or someone else. When I realized that the information that I knew would become a part of who I was, and I was able to comfortably sit at a meeting without notes and answer questions. And I think that's when I realized that I was ready for the next step.
Yeah. Your story, and just sparked a flashback of my first time needing to present to my leadership team back in the chemistry lab about like optimizing a process, and how like I brought like a whole lab manual. No one needed that. No one needed that. No one needed that. But it just was like just wanting to sound good and sound smart and all that. So I just think that
Security
that story,
blanket.
right,
Right.
exactly. It's so
Yeah.
important to highlight that. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm often on the other side of this equation. I'm often the marketing person kind of pushing the scientists or technical people to make
Right.
presentations. But you and I had a bit of this conversation, and where I say, yeah, let's really talk about the questions, but then I'm going to take them away and we're going to have a conversation. Because the
Right.
fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, for you, James, in the situation that you described, and for you, Anne, you know it. You know it cold.
Right. Right.
And so all that kind of those pieces of paper are is a crutch, really. It kind of spins into my next question a bit, if I may. So you worked in the governmental space,
Mm-hmm.
which, for right or wrong, the perception is that that's a pretty rigid place, and there's very much a hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And now with your own consulting firm, you've got no one to answer to but yourself. I've been through
Right.
that transition a couple of times, and it is a transition. Talk to us about sort of the power that you feel, or the insecurity that you feel, in going from kind of be beholden to a whole hierarchy of people
Right.
versus being beholden to no one but yourself at this point.
Yeah, I remember when I was preparing for this podcast, I typed out all my answers and I sent them to you, and you said, "That's great, but I'll read them and throw them out." And I think in the past I had to have everything I said approved. Everything I was to speak or to allude to had to be approved by several layers up. I think what was liberating about working on my own was that I didn't have to get anything approved and I could speak from my heart. And I think what happened sometimes was that it was so rigid that they had to approve something that I was afraid to go off the script. I think when there's an interview happening, you don't speak from a script. It is a conversation. And I think that made me feel a little bit boxed in and stilted. I think what I miss about that sort of organizational structure, it wasn't so much the structure, it was the synergy. And I think for me, it's the one thing that I miss. Sometimes I work with colleagues that I had worked with in the past, but it's not nearly in the same way. And I have found that a lot of times I've gotten my best ideas working with other people, even if they weren't in data management, if they were analysts or they were in something else completely different. That might spark something in me. Just as I'm talking, it might spark a new question for you. Yeah. And that, it's usually me and the client back and forth talking, and then me and the people I'm collaborating with sort of on the other side of it, on the side. And I miss that synergy. And I think, I might start looking for full-time work again soon, just because I like working with people that, the people who spark the best ideas aren't always the ones you think they're going to be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're your harshest critic. Sometimes they're the ones who just come at it from a different perspective. Sometimes you have to force yourself to come at it from a different perspective because of the way the organization's culture is. And so, right now the work that I'm doing is primarily, structure and how, procedure. And I really miss the coming up with out of the box thinking, spurred on by working with others.
You'll get there again, I'm sure. James, I think you have the next question.
So, we talked about the transitions. We talked about different industries, really,
Mm-hmm.
governmental, now data, now working in a client-based role, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you take those breaks between industries or role transitions, right? Your career doesn't stop, right?
Right.
You evolve with where you're going in your career. So what advice would you give for our executives or aspiring executives who feel stuck in their current chapter because
Mm-hmm.
they're too afraid to hit that reset button?
I think you can reset in place. I think you can look at where you are and decide if that's where you want to be. And if it's not, you can decide what it is that you want to be, what the role is that you want to play, and become that, either through training at home at night on the side or training through, in the workday. If it's maybe doing a little extra work in addition to what's expected of you, or taking a little bit of a chance still within the structure you're in, pushing the boundaries of a project you have been asked to do. And by that way, you can learn to spread your wings. If that satisfies you and you stay in that job that you are feeling a little stuck in, if taking these steps to get yourself unstuck, you might find that it might help improve your satisfaction of where you are. It might also say, nope, it's time to go. It's time to move on. But you have to have a vision of where you want to be. And you can do that right where you are. You can start.
Yeah.
I had a mentor say exactly those same words to me. And, I'm no longer a chemist, right?
Right.
But the advice I was given was very similar on where do you see yourself and how do you build the skills you want to become that person, role, industry, whatnot. So I'm glad that you were able to share that story as well.
Almost like you figure out where you want to go and you kind of reverse engineer back to, okay, So that's where I want to be. So this is step one of N that we're going to need to get there.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think it's interesting. I don't know where I heard it recently. Someone said the role that they're hiring for that you apply to isn't what's on the paper. It's they want you to do what the person who was in that role before did, and they want you to do it better.
Right.
So how are you really supposed to know what that person did? And so really you have to learn how best to bring value to any job, whatever the job is. And when you learn how to continually improve your ability to bring value to the job, then you're going to be that person that they want to hire.
Well, great. I think that we have reached the lightning round, if I'm not mistaken. So
Okay.
we wrap up the Q Suite for every issue with, I will do a lightning round, and then James will take us through our mentoring moment. So these are rapid fire. So just a question or two. It's funny. I was watching Friends last night, and they had that iconic episode when the girls lose their apartment to the boys because they
Yes.
do that quiz. So if I start sounding a little too,
Transponster.
yeah, he's a transplant, that's right. So if I start sounding a little bit game show hosty, it's David Schwimmer's fault. So
Okay. Sounds good.
okay, so first question. What is the one thing that you wish you had known sooner?
That people are willing to accept new ideas, but you have to be confident about presenting.
Well, I like that one. That's a really good one.
That's a great
Okay,
one.
next question. What would you say to someone who is out, who's just beginning their career? And let's even refine it deeper. Someone who is looking to have a career in data.
In
And they're
data.
out.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh. I think the space is generally an open-minded group of people, and that comes from, I mean, you would think data would be a rigid area, but it actually isn't. There's more of an art to it than a science. And so
Yeah.
you have to have people always thinking in new ways. So I think what I found was it actually didn't matter being out among data folks as much as I would have thought. So it's definitely a very welcoming group of people.
Yeah, it's funny. I just came back from the Databricks Summit, which is a big data and AI
Yep.
summit. It was actually a pretty cool group. I was surprised.
Yeah.
I've gone to a lot of technology conferences, and it had kind of a cool vibe to it. So, okay, next question. The world is abuzz currently with AI. What is the one thing about data governance we're not getting right yet?
It doesn't have to be a chore. Yes, it is an organizing principle, but it's one that you create. And you create it through collaboration and consensus building. And I stress the building part because there isn't consensus in the beginning. I don't know if you've ever been on a jury, but I have, and we spent maybe 5 days hearing the case and 2 weeks deliberating, because we had to convince others, and you have to come up with a unanimous ruling. So learning how to collaborate, I think.
I love that.
That is great, Anne. And to close us out with our Q Suite mentoring moment, just to remind our listeners, the Q Suite mentoring moment, we like to ask all our guest speakers that join us. So, Anne, what is your mentoring moment? What piece of career advice that you received from a mentor, boss, really helped you and helped define your career?
So I think coming of age at the same time as I was developing where I would end up in my career happened at the same time. And I think for folks now, they might say, well, I know I'm gay, and I'd like to, join a space that's more receptive to that. And I would say that navigating systems that are not designed for you, cultures that are not designed to welcome you with open arms, take it in different. Navigating the systems not designed for you is just as important as trying to directly change systems from the outside. I think it's easy to view someone as other when they reside in other environments. But by becoming part of the mainstream and being who you are, you teach folks that who you are is mainstream. And so I would encourage people not to look for professions or career paths that might be welcoming, but to realize that you might change some minds by just following your heart on what you want to do and being passionate about that and showing folks that every voice is essential.
Love that. That's a perfect place to conclude. And thank you so much. As I said, I've been so looking forward to this, and it was everything and more than I hoped it would be. I hope it was fun for you as well.
Great. Yes. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you reaching out and asking me to be on the show. And it has been fun. So,
Yeah, nothing but our pleasure. Well, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.